Hello, everyone. I'm Keith the Stone, and this is HeroesX Office Hours. I'm here again, as usual, with Greg Nagy, Sarah, Janet, and Hélène, and we're going to discuss the questions for hours 5 and 6, I believe, as posed by Greg. And I say that because it's Greg's voice here in hour 5. He says, in hour 5 of H24H, it took me, Greg, twice as long to say what I wanted to say, compared to the average length of the other chapters or hours. Sometimes I ask myself, was it worth it? But I ask the question differently here. Do you think that reading the songs of Sappho makes a difference in your overall view of Achilles? I hope so. I bet it does. What do people have to say?
I so hope so.
Yes. Well, there's a mention of a word used by both. It's in the Iliad and it's used also by Sappho. And it's the word seedling. In Iliad, we have "and he shut up" equal to a seedling, and I will never be welcoming him back home. That's in Iliad 18. And then in Sappho, to what shall I liken you? To make the likeness beautiful, to a tender seedling. So that's in Sappho. So is the seedling in the Iliad a reason to lament the fall of a man at its prime, while the seedling in Sappho is the reason to celebrate his beauty as he's being raised to the status of a god?
A beautiful formulation, but I don't really see why we need the word "or." It's both. It's not "or," but "and." In other words, celebrating beauty and lamenting are the same thing in terms of this particular ancient song culture. And could I add that I think even my choice of words for translating ernos and the various other ancient Greek words as seedling is because I don't like the word shoot. And when I was much younger, there used to be an advertising campaign for a new, shall we say, line for the canned vegetables called Jolly Green Giant. And I think it was called what was it called? The Little Sprout or something. And I think the tenderness of a young plant is something that is appreciated much more in ancient Greek song culture. There's so many beautiful words for it. It's so poeticized. And the closest I could come was seedling. But, I'm ready to change that word in my English working translations. If you wonderful colleagues and you participants out there think there's a better word that can convey the idea that this is something very beautiful, but also something very lamentable if this expression of green vitality it wilts.
Well, in fact, one of the participants was saying that comparing your translation to another translation, she liked yours much better.
Well, thank you.
So I think you're good at the moment. I like it. That ling ending is a sort of endearment and
yes.
Something that can be small, or it's much loved, like a mother or somebody who.
Oh, I'm so glad. You make me so happy, dear Sarah, and dear participant out there. Could I say that another ling word that I am tempted to use now and then is, it's more science fiction than anything, earthling.
Yeah.
Well, that's for other things, but earthling is pretty good for our human condition from the point of view of the gods.
Yes, I was thinking deities. So another part of the discussion has been that Sappho has helped not only in understanding Achilles, but also the deities themselves as well. For example, the identifying of a bridegroom with Aries, or also thinking about the ideal bridegroom, where they're both identified in that way. So it's helping to understand that whole nexus, I think, of connections.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. When I was very, very young, there was a group called the Kingston Trio, and they had a song that was based on a Russian folk song. I mean, a real folk song, a Russian folk song, and the English translation was "Where Have All the Flowers Gone?" And it had to do with war dead and just viewing collectively all the lost youth that we think about, that we try to memorialize after wars.
Another participant mentioned different traditions of Achilles. Achilles has a son in different traditions. Are these different traditions or versions of Achilles complementary to each other, or in argument in each other?
Yes, I really think that we moderns are at a loss because our Iliad does not accentuate the romantic Achilles. I think we would like Achilles a lot more if we had more of even Sappho's song-making traditions. We have so few bits and pieces of Sappho's beautiful poetics, but certainly the Achilles that was sung about on the island of Lesbos, let's say around 600 before our era, the year 600 roughly, would have been a much, much, much more romantic figure. And certainly it would be the kind of figure who is just the, how shall I say it, the romantic ideal of every young girl who is thinking of getting married. Again, I think of a not so modern song. This is by Carly Simon. She composed her own words, not just the whole music. And I think the wording goes, and all the girls dreamed that they'd be your partner, they'd be your partner, you're so vain.
I remember that. And that dreaming of being the partner with Achilles or whoever. Someone's been talking about that in the sense of, in Iliad, the kleos axiton is unreachable, whereas reading about the more personal connection, the romantic interest, if you like, it brings it closer to the things that are experienced in everyday life. And the poetry of Sappho has really helped to bring those together.
Yes, and the fact that Sappho 31 is such a beautiful wedding song. I'm convinced that it's a wedding song, although the ancient world doesn't spell it out. You have to, shall we say, read it out of the words of Sappho 31. But I don't think I'm reading into it that it is a wedding song, and a beautiful wedding song.
Well, let's go to the hour 6 question. To die as a thereupon for someone else is to identify with that someone else. Patroklos certainly dies for Achilles, but to what extent does he really identify with him?
That's a tough one because in a sense, what we see in Patroklos is the kinder, gentler Achilles.
Yes, but there is a comment or a question from a participant. interesting one. When Patroklos wears the armor of Achilles, does it bring him closer to Achilles' emotion of rage and hubris, which is what perhaps makes him ignore Apollo's warnings to retreat?
Yes. I've never said it this way, but your participant's question, or our participant's question, inspires me to say it this way. Yes, Patroklos wears the armor of Achilles, but as I hasten to point out in H24H, there's one thing he leaves behind, and that's the spear of Achilles. Now, the spear of Achilles is the one thing that he got not from his immortal mother, but from his mortal father. And it is ashwood, that's the staff of the spear, with a tip of bronze. It is, to me, one of the best symbols. I'll use the word symbol. Let's make a shortcut. The best symbol for the warrior's mortality. So if you forget to, or I shouldn't say forget, if you neglect to take with you the spear of Achilles, then your entire set of armor is delusional, because then it does look as if you are immortal. And may I extend this, dear Elen, I could offer our participant an extension of this thought, which is that when Hector strips the armor, which really belongs to Achilles, from the body of Patroklos and puts it on himself, he too is an incomplete Achilles, because in a sense, he too becomes delusional. And it'll cost him his life.
Another theme that's been running through the discussion here is the possible physical closeness of Achilles and Patroklos, which perhaps for an Athenian audience who were used to literal physical expression between men and younger men was expressed. And for example, we know that the bones are going to be put together in the same urn. It's like they're fusing so completely, perhaps even more than they could in life.
Yep.
So is that physical closeness something that may or may not have been expressed? I was thinking about the word pilos, which is near and dear. When you're talking about your own body, it's your own limb or heart,
yep.
or whatever. So to what extent may there be some literal physical closeness between them?
Yes. And this is why when I talk about the relationship of Achilles and Patroklos, I prefer to say, or I prefer to use the word homo-eroticism, not homosexuality, simply because if we say homosexuality or if we say gay, we tend to read in our own values of the many different forms of human sexuality, and we know anthropologically that same-sex relationships are very common in a wide variety of cultures, whether it's physical or mental. In some cultures, it's simply a mentality of relating to people of your own, I'll say, gender, in the sense of constructing sex socially. Wow, am I getting intellectual here? Let me just say that if I say homoeroticism, that gives me a wider range of possibilities about how even the same culture in different phases of its evolution might view the relationship of Achilles and Patroklos. And it's clear to me that even in the 5th century, in the first half, I would say that it was perfectly possible to think of Achilles and Patroklos as homosexual or gay lovers as we would imagine them to be, using our own constructs of what being gay is. And now I'm talking about the first half of the 21st century of our era. Okay, that said, I think that our Iliad plays down the homo-eroticism, but I also know that other forms of the Achilles tradition in ancient Greek song culture played it up. And I think for young people today, especially, who struggle with what their elders may have thought in a more prejudicial way, I just like to say, well, sexuality is one way of expressing intimacy, but what the Iliad, even our Iliad, really emphasizes is something that is even more intimate than sexual, if one can imagine that. And that intimacy is something that can be put this way: am I willing to give up my life for my fellow warrior, for example? And that's a really tough question. Does that mean that I love my fellow warrior more than I love myself? Well, not really, because even Achilles really, really, really loves his own life. And the warriors we're considering were not all that eager to give up their lives. Not at all. It's just that there were some things that were even more important than life itself, if that can be grasped. And that's what the poetics of the Iliad can be seen as struggling with. That's what we struggle with when we read the Iliad. Even we struggle, of course, with it. Is what is most important in life? And you know, I'm fascinated with how aristocratic societies in the so-called classical era would even institutionalize what you and I would call homosexual relationships in warfare. I'm thinking of the so-called sacred band of aristocratic warriors in the city-state of Thebes, where it was institutionalized that an older man and a boy who was not yet a man, in the sense that he was not yet married, would be paired off so that the elite shock troop would be 50%, I'll say it in the ancient Greek, erastai, and 50% eromenoi, paired off with each other, ready to die for each other. That is a historical reality that actually is documented for the classical period. Now, we're talking about the pre-classical period, of course, because we're talking about the heroic age where people can retroject whatever institutions they have for coming of age emotional development back into the heroic age of the past. So it's very complex, but it all boils down to that simple question that I'm asking ourselves is what does it take to give up your own life for somebody when you really love your own life?
Another participant is meditating on Briseis and her lament. And there's a question. Does Briseis participate at all as an intermediate in the identification between Achilles and Patroklos?
Oh, so much so, so much so. For us, it's so weird when Briseis sings, "Oh, you were always so nice to me, Patroklos." Now I'm depoeticizing it. Wow, this is not poetry the way I said it. She says it as very high poetry in her lament, but you were so kind and gentle. And you promised me that Achilles would be your partner, so to speak. And what is that? And yet we know that Briseis really loved her husband, and it will never forget the grief that she felt when she saw the dead body of her husband who had been killed by Achilles. So how can somebody like that say what she seems to be saying? Well, isn't it nice that lament is a choral activity? That is to say, it is a collective performance of grief. By collective, I mean a choros, a group of women. Sure, there's one dominant voice and the other voices are recessive. But in that lament by Briseis, it's so clear that when you look at all the sorrow that's expressed by this ensemble of singing and dancing women, by dancing, think of swaying back and forth, any kind of motor activity. When you think of that, that performance is a kaleidoscope of emotions, of different kinds of love. And if you break it down to what any individual in a lamenting ensemble is thinking, it can be their own loves and their own agenda. And that's what is said in the description of Briseis's lament. Is, okay, that's what she sang, and everybody joined in antiphonal choral performance, and everybody had their own agenda. And that means, wouldn't it mean that we too, when we hear this, have our own agenda of grief, our own loved ones that we're particularly sad about at that moment?
So in a way, we are identifying with these characters, and at the same time, it's almost as if that reflects back to us in our own personal grief.
Exactly.
I think it's beautiful.
So it's so cohesive. It's so, how shall I say it, community building. And that's why I'm fascinated that the last lament we hear in the Iliad, which is at the funeral of Hector, at that point, it's not just the women, it's the whole demos of Troy. It's everybody, old men, women, children, the whole ensemble, they're all grieving. So it kind of symbolizes, doesn't it, the model for that grief as you look through time, as you look forward in time from the heroic age all the way to the present, where the present is our demos, is our community.
Wow. Thanks, Greg, for those great thoughts.
Thank you.
Well, Sarah, Jenna, and Len, thank you. And thank you, participants, for all of your great thoughts. Keep them coming.
Beautiful thoughts. I just so love these conversations. I just wish they could go on forever.
Well, we'll be back for more
Yeah, let's
next
go
week.
back for more.
All right.
Till
Bye
the
for
next.
now.
Bye.